Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll let people joining, and while people are joining, so we haven't started yet. Again, we will let some people joining this workshop. While we are waiting, I encourage you to check your inbox in case you receive this email. If you want to participate, and having some hands-on experience with this workshop, following along with me, you could claim this Humanitec account in order to play either platform engineer or developer role. So again, if you receive this email, you could just accept and claim your account. If it's not in your main inbox, maybe you could check your junk email and spam inbox. We have 30 people joining. I will let a few minutes before starting. So we are still waiting for a couple of more people, and we will start very soon. Wonderful. Just to check that everyone is hearing me, can I have a quick comment from someone in the audience? Just to say hi, just to make sure the audio, yep, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for confirming. Wonderful. So let's get started. Anyway, this workshop will be recorded. So let's begin. Let's start this. So I'm very excited to be presenting and delivering this workshop. It's a 2 hours workshop. Again, you may have received this email and accepted already the invite. I have seen some of you doing that. Thank you for that. If you want to play some hands-on experience during and following along with this workshop, I encourage you to claim your Humanitec account via this email received earlier today. Maybe check your junk or spam inbox in case. If you don't want to do the hands-on, or you have, I don't know, some issues to join this organization, no worries. You could follow along this workshop. The goal is for you to understand the end-to-end workflow for this workshop. And typically, you are in this workshop in order to build your own MVP and your own IDP, internal developer platform, right? We will squeeze all the content in 2 hours. And again, very excited about that. I'm customer success engineer. My name is Mathieu Benoit. I'm working for Humanitec. And my goal on a day-to-day basis is helping my customer accelerating their own building of their own internal developer platform. So I'm very passionate about that and very technical. So I hope I will have a lot of question and interaction today. I may want to tackle some of the question at the end of the session. But please let's keep the question coming in the chat, and I will moderate and see when I could answer them. But again, please feel free to ask your own question. Agenda of today, we will do a quick level of expectation where we will set the expectation, the context about defining maybe what's a platform, what's an IDP, some reference architecture, just to make sure we have all the context of this workshop. a quick demo where you could see in action some of the stuff that you could play with and the actual workshop, right? So it's kind of divided like this, some wrap up and some resources at the end, Q&A, but please, again, don't wait for the end, ask the question as they come. We will have more context around this. There is a Slack channel as well where you could ask questions. I won't be personally moderating over there, but we could follow up offline during the actual workshop. Feel free again to drop your question here in this Zoom call chat. Wonderful. By the end of this session, the goal for you will be to understand what's the value of a workload specification and how you could boost and improve the developer experience of your own developer, right? When you are building your own internal developer platform. On the other hand, another key component you will see today is the orchestrator, platform orchestrator, right? You will see where it fits in your own tool chain and ecosystem of tools, and how your platform engineers, with the help of security, observability team, SRE team, etc., infrastructure, will be able to standardize and abstract most of the concept for the developer, right? So that's the second concept. At the end, we will give you some tips about how and where to start as well, based on your own tool chain and ecosystem of tools. What could be your platform, your own platform with Humanitec? But before going there, I just want to make sure we have the same context here. We have seen this evolution, right? You have seen that, we have seen that, and it's not new, right? Platform engineering is not new in terms of technology, in terms of maybe culture, in terms of how developer and ops could collaborate for delivering faster their product, right, at the end of the day. But we have seen an evolution in the mindset, how people are actually collaborating, right? So if we saw back in the days the sysadmin role, where there is a standardization and it was separated, then DevOps came maybe around 2008-9, where we got this paradigm: you build it, you want to run it, right? And we are seeing a mix of both now, where the maturity of the industry is evolving and trying to have a better collaboration as well, but also a seamless experience for the developer, and not having the developer, for example, doing infrastructure security by themselves, right? So that's kind of the shift of the mindset and best practice and common practices all together and now improved, right? And optimized, if I could say. And here we could see some business driver and the goal and the objective for company out there. Their goal is making sure the developer are autonomous, they could self-serve themselves, but as well, they could be abstracted from complexity, right? On the other hand, we could have, let's say, the CIO or CEO of a company where they want to go fast and go quick with the time to market, right? They want to ship feature for their end user. They want to drive the business. They want incomes. They want to be paid by shipping and selling product and feature out there. Architects, they want standardization. Here again, it could be cloud architect, it could be other kind of role around this. Financial, how we could save cost, right? And not having this shadow IT spending more than other infrastructure and other team. Operation, how we drive more automation and best practice, common best practice. And on a security perspective, how we standardize and we make sure we are compliant with our expectation in our own company, in our own industry, how we have the security first approach without overwhelming our developer, for example. So as a developer, I want to deploy my app and I don't want to deal with infrastructure, for example, and Kubernetes. On the other side, there is this second stakeholder and key stakeholder where with a collaboration of all the other cloud architects, security, and infrastructure people, they want to abstract a consistent and secure platform to make their developer more productive. So in a nutshell, platform engineering could be kind of summarized with three key pillars, if I could say. What do we want to achieve? Velocity for the developer. We want stability for a platform engineer perspective. And we want to have this product mindset, right? Where is coming the IDP acronym and the IDP concept, internal developer platform. That's where your own platform, internal, will be seen as a product, right? You have customer, even if they are internal customer. You have a roadmap, you have features, right? You want to support some features and use cases, but maybe not all the use cases out there, right? So you have this product mindset in mind. Three pillars for adoption, and we will see that today. How we abstract, again, for the developer, how we standardize, and how we visualize. And here, three key pillars with Humanitec that you could play with and leverage is the score specification. We will see in detail what it is. The orchestrator for the ops and administrator perspective, and how I could visualize what could be my single pane of glass to get more insights about what's going on behind the scene, because I'm abstracted as much as possible. The score file is this YAML file. It's not a YAML, a Kubernetes manifest. It's a YAML file where developer will be able to describe how they want to deploy their own containerized workload. I will go in more details in this session, but that's the first key pieces here. Here, there is this notion of abstraction from the platform and from the environment. This exact same YAML file, score workload specification, will be agnostic for development, for staging and production. So here, I will go in more details, but that's how, as a developer, I want to define how I want to eventually deploy my workload. The orchestrator in Humanitec, we have this Humanitec orchestrator where the developer will say, hey, I want to deploy this workload, right? But on the other end, we will have the platform engineering on the bottom left, defining their recipes. How, as soon as I get a request from one developer or one project, what do I want to do, right? Where this workload will be deployed, where I could find a database for them if they are asking for a database. Should I provision on demand and dynamically this kind of infrastructure, right? So you will bring your own recipes and the orchestrator will resolve all the dependencies asked by the request of a developer. So that's the principle and definition of the orchestrator. Again, we will see that in action. Here we have the third pieces, which is a portal, how I could visualize what's going on, right? My project, my application, my workload, their dependencies, the logs of the running container, even if I don't have access to the Kubernetes cluster per se. So that's the kind of UI you could have, as well as for the platform engineer, seen as administrator, how I could visually see all the definition, recipes, and interaction with our own IDP, our own internal developer platform. Here, what's interesting is where the three components fit in your own organization, in your own ecosystem, right? And here, you could see two of the components, the score file, right? The score workload specification in yellow, and the portal at the very top. Here, you may be familiar with Backstage. During this workshop, we will play a little bit with Backstage, and we will see the differences between Backstage, seen as a developer portal, and Humanitec portal as well. There is some overlap and complementary tool here. I will explain that later. But here, what you should see is your own developer control plane. Are they using VS Code? Are they using Eclipse, Visual Studio? Name your IDE. Are you using GitLab, GitHub, Azure repository? You bring your own tool, right? That's the key piece here. And you will bring your own container as well. You will bring your own CI/CD pipeline, right? We don't replace most of the tools you have currently. We are layers for optimizing how you will abstract again for your developer and how you will standardize for your platform engineer. And here is a third component, the orchestrator, sitting in the middle of your CI/CD pipeline. And that's this guy interacting now with your resource plane, right? Here, I have an example on GCP, Google Cloud, but it's working with Azure, AWS, or any ecosystem, OpenShift ecosystem, on premises, right? Because at the end of the day, what you need to understand here is we are 3 components and you plug and play in your own ecosystem. That's the key pieces here. Then what is important in your own IDP is to bring also monitoring, right? Monitoring is key in platform engineering, end-to-end monitoring. You could bring your own Dynatrace or other Datadog or other tools. And same for the security plane, right? You will bring your own secret manager. You will bring your own other IDP for the identity provider, for example. And here again, on the right, you could see that, hey, I'm bringing maybe my Azure account, my Google Cloud project, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where you will bring also your Kubernetes cluster. As of today, our orchestrator will have one runtime supported Kubernetes cluster, and you will bring your own cluster. We don't manage a cluster. We don't manage your CI/CD pipeline, et cetera, right? So again, the key piece here, just look at the 3 yellow areas, and that's where we will optimize and be integrated in your own toolchain and ecosystem of tools. Feel free to provide questions here. But here I want to provide you some pointers. Again, this slide and the recording will be shared, but we have some reference architecture. It was one of them. Again, you pick and choose your tool, you change. We have an open source version of this reference architecture, and you could adapt this to visually see your own toolchain. Here, that's one of the pointers. We have also what we call resource packs, where, again, you remember the platform engineering will bring their own recipes in order to provision their databases, for example. So here we provide default recipes, resource packs for AWS, for Azure, for GCP, even in cluster. So that's some pointer I would like to share with you. Again, links will be shared later. And wonderful. Before jumping into a kind of a demo, sometimes I will pick up one question here. Sometimes the reference shows the orchestrator before the CD pipeline, sometime after. That's a really good question. What defines where the orchestrator integrates? And that's a good point. So let me clarify this here, because you're right. At some point, you may have seen different flavor of this reference architecture, and that's the goal. Because you will decide where the orchestrator fits. Is it in the CI pipeline where you want to deploy stuff in your CI to have, let's say, more quality test, right? Deploying in, I don't know, ephemeral environment before graduating in your actual CD pipeline, continuous deployment. So you could pick and choose and adapt with your current, let's say, Git flow, right? Other scenario could be the last mile push in the cluster could be done via GitOps tool as well. So that's where you could also replace and invert the orchestrator before the CD pipeline. So that's the kind of scenario, but good question. And also what I want to add in the Humanitec orchestrator, if you don't have an opinionated way to do CD in your CI/CD pipelines, we have a feature, Humanitec pipelines, where you could actually have enhanced feature doing pipeline. So sometime we could also replace this part if that's a fit with you. Yes, another question. Could we have the orchestrator working with GitOps? And you totally, it's a good question. Thank you for asking. And you see this orchestrator here, pushing here, and contacting the Kubernetes engine resource, right? So here, this arrow is for the push of the manifest, Kubernetes manifest. There is different way to push over there this manifest, right? But instead of pushing directly, there is another flavor and mode where you could push that in a Git repository. And here, from your Kubernetes cluster, you could have Argo CD, Flux CD, config sync, your GitOps tool pulling this manifest from a Git repository. So good question. But yes, supported 2 flavors directly in cluster or in Git repository to support the GitOps workflow. Good question. Thank you. Let's move on a little bit, and I will still keep some questions. What I would like to do is a quick demo. Here I want to spend some time just on the developer workflow. What does that mean when we say improving the productivity of a developer, enhancing the developer experience, right? So let me switch my screen here. And what I want to show you here is reloading my UI. It will take a few seconds here. But what I want to show you here, as a developer, I'm in my local machine, right? Local environment. And what I want to show you, and here I'm loading code space in GitHub, but let's say I have Visual Studio Code locally, right? So that's the same. And here, while loading, what I want to show you is, and that's part of the application you could play with during the workshop. Before going there, I'm just showing you very quickly what you could do as a developer, right? So here I'm locally. I have this application. It's a very basic application where I have my application actually putting here an image, right? It could be locally. I could have a Node.js application. You will see another application. It could be whatever application. Again, the workload specification you have in front of you, Score, will take as an input a container, right? So you will have your CI pipeline building a container and injecting, during the pipeline, the actual image, right? Because you will build your image, there is a immutable tag or digest, and that's this guy who will be injected and deployed to the orchestrator at some point. But here again, what I want to show you is the developer workflow, right? So here, maybe that's the first time you are seeing a Score file. I will define the service, how I want to expose my containerized workload, which port, right? That's something I know, I own, and I will define here. What I want to show as well is environment variable, right? So I will be able to say, hey, for my workload, I have one container. There will be an image for sure, and environment variable, right? I could add some resource limit. I could add some other information here. That's a kind of liveness probe. I could bring my files, my volumes. So here you could already see some Kubernetes concept, but it's not directly Kubernetes manifest again. It's a workload specification. And we will see that this workload specification is not just for Kubernetes. And I will show you live in a few seconds how you could leverage that in not just Kubernetes runtime. So here I have my own experience. I'm in VS Code, so I could have this extension installed. Again, auto-completion, some linter here telling me that it's not allowed in the specification. I could have also here this section telling me where I could tell as a developer, here is the dependencies. Here is what I need in order to have my workload working, right? So for example, in this case, I want to have a DNS. I want to expose my workload. Is it an internal DNS? Is it protected by HTTPS? What's the TLS certificate? Is it public, internal, again, DNS? I don't know. And as a developer, I don't want to know, right? I want to provide the minimum information just to focus on the intent, right? Then we will see the platform engineering actually answering and figuring out how to answer such a request, right? And here, that's also where I could define, for example, my database, right? So here I could say, yes, I need, for example, MongoDB database, right? So here, what I want to show you here, I could have already a warning, right? So I'm locally, and I'm already interacting and connected to my IDP, my own internal developer platform, provided by my platform engineering team, right? And here, it's not supported, right? It's not defined in the organization. So apparently, as a developer, I cannot use this type, MongoDB. So what I want to show you here is this VS Code extension, where I could see some application on the left, but now also I could see the available resources. And guess what? In the available resources, there is no MongoDB. So the platform engineer are not supporting. That's not a golden path or use case that they are supporting. So maybe I should interact, collaborate with my internal team, because maybe I need MongoDB, right? And that's the well-supported golden path provided by my platform engineering and my own platform, right? So here, for example, I could say, yes, I want Redis instead, right? So I will remove this part. And that's a kind of things I could do here. I could inject the output of this Redis in the environment variable. We will see that with the other application. And that's a kind of interaction you could have, right? So what I want to show you now is here. Let's say I did a commit. I will show you in a pull request as a best practice. I want to show you very quickly after that ephemeral environment. Actually, it will be part of the workshop. So we will take that for later. But let's say it's already deployed. It's deployed in a temporary environment or in development or staging on production. What is interesting here is I could ask my platform about all the dependencies actually running in a current environment, right? So for example, here, what I did for this guy, I did in development on the left, right? For this application, where I'm supposing that I have deployed my workload, right? If you look at this guy here, we could see that the orchestrator or my own IDP resolved the dependencies and all the graph of the resources. So you could see from a workload, I ask for a Redis database, and I ask for a DNS, and I have maybe someone injected the TLS certificate and maybe the ingress object. So all the platform and platform engineering team will resolve this kind of complex resource graph. And you remember on my side, as a developer, I just ask for DNS and Redis. That's it, right? So that's the kind of things that could be abstracted and standardized, security injection, etc. So that was part of the demo for now. I will move on to the next section. Is there any question here? So far, so good, I hope. So that's a developer experience. Again, you could play with that if we have time. Let's move to the actual workshop now, right? That's what we want to do. Here, 4 main steps, like promised in the invite. The goal is to start from Backstage, and we will see some differences with the developer portal in Humanitec and this developer portal, how they complement each other. That's the first part. Second part, we will create an actual feature request where we will have ephemeral environment, right? We will define what is it. Then we will have more platform engineering task, right? Where we will add the database dependencies in cluster or in Terraform. So we will see the differences here. and also how I could standardize and centralize some security and governance best practice, right? So that's the common scenario that we will show and see live during this workshop. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, you should have received this kind of email. Check your junk and spam inbox as well. You could claim the account now. I have seen many people doing that. Thank you for this. If you want to follow along and having some hands-on experience, reproduce what I'm doing, that's your opportunity to play both the platform engineer and developer personas here. We will let you some times to play with this organization with both roles. If you don't want to follow and do the hands-on part, that's okay. You could follow me, watch this workshop. I will do the step-by-step stuff as well. And there is a recording, right? So I don't know, connectivity issue or any issue, I won't be able to troubleshoot and we won't be able to troubleshoot live, but you could follow along and bear with us if possible. Yeah, and that's how and where you should start, right? So you could scan this QR code. I could also share the link while doing that to everyone. You should go to this link and you will have this Backstage instance, right? We provision a Backstage instance for the purpose of this workshop. So let me open it. And actually, I will open this guy. So that's what you should see, right? If anyone has any issue, please ping us in the chat, but that's what you should see. So let me zoom in a little bit, right? So here, let me introduce Backstage first. I don't know if everyone is familiar with Backstage. Here, I won't provide a workshop about Backstage. It's a beast in itself, very robust, very adopted out there. But here, what we want to have this developer portal where developer could have a centralized technical documentation, technical onboarding, templates, snippets, and documentation. And maybe a single pane of glass where they could have a centralized view of different components, maybe in the platform, right? So for example, here we have a plugin in Humanitec and in Backstage connecting to Humanitec. And that's what we are going to leverage, right? Here we have, if I click on create, 2 templates provided to the developer to accelerate their onboarding. And here, 2 templates that you could play with, right? And I'm selecting based on my use cases, golden path I want to follow. I don't know, maybe Java application with PostgreSQL, how to do that, right? I could read the documentation, or I could have an up-to-date and up and running template that I could leverage and maybe scaffold. So that this concept here very appealing to accelerate adoption and the experience of your developer. So we will leverage that, and you will see that this template will interact with different API. 2 APIs, mostly in this case, GitHub to create a repo, and Humanitec to create a project, an application in Humanitec. And then we will have the GitHub action triggering the deployment in Humanitec. So that's the kind of stuff you could do. You could have your observability tool as well injected here. Any other tool, right? And here you could centralize and having a seamless experience for your developer. So what I want to do here is selecting one application. So let's, before I was with pod info, so let's use the Node.js here. So I will name it, and please, you could do it. You could do the same, right? You have the right to do that. I will create just providing a name. We could ask for more inputs and parameter. In our case, it's very simple. And then I create. And like I mentioned, we are creating a GitHub repo on demand and wiring and binding this repo to Humanitec in order to deploy the stuff in Humanitec. So what I want to do here is opening this GitHub repository. And while I'm opening this guy, I will also answer the question, is the documentation maintained as code? And if so, how do you deal with docs on tools like Confluence, please? So that's a good question. Transparently, I'm not an expert in Backstage, but I think there is multiple ways to do that. And having some APIs that you could call, in your case, maybe Confluence, right? And yes, as code will be also the preferred solution. Again, I'm not an expert, so I don't have the direct answer, but yes, that's possible. And that's the goal of such a tool for sure. Good question, but I won't spend too much time on this Backstage part, but yes, you're right. That's a very good practice here. So here I have this GitHub repository already created, and there is this organization. And actually, we could see that a lot of people are already testing. Thank you for that, and that's good. You could see different repository created. And if I go back to Backstage, I could also see here I'm in my organization, right? And look at that. Now my platform is live. I have you as developers onboarding in my platform, right? I hope everything will go well. So that's something we could track and we will see. But look at this, from 2 applications, now we have more, right? So that's good. Play with that, please. That's a goal. What I can show you here, my repository. So it was this guy here. We could see that the action actually is already finished, right? So here what we did, right? We created the repo and we did an initial commit, right? And what I want to show you now is some of the setup here. So let me open code space. And that's something you should be able to do in order to play with the VS Code extension if you want, and some other connectivities. Let me open it. And here I could browse the code very soon. Actions. While it's opening, you could see that we have a GitHub action job here. And here we are building the container image. We are actually pushing it in a container registry. And after that, we are deploying the score manifest to Humanitec, right? So that's what's happening here. While this guy is still loading, that's what I do when I do a git commit in the main branch, right? And here, that's very basic stuff. Again, you bring your own git flow, right? But the goal, what you need to understand here is you have your GitHub action, maybe in pipeline, in GitLab pipeline as well. But at the end of the day, look at this. We are, and I could zoom in a little bit, in the pipeline, we are interacting with Humanitec, right? The orchestrator. You remember there is a score file to the orchestrator. That's this command line. That's the CLI you will need to integrate in your pipeline. And that's humctl score deploy. And guess what? Taking as an input the score file, right? Deploying on a specific environment, in this case, development. It's hard-coded in this case. I will explain why. And I want to inject the dynamic tag and digest of my image. And that's this core file and this container image I want to deploy, right? So what we could do here, I could open this guy here. And what I want to do very quickly is actually doing a feature request, right? So here I could say, hello, PlatformCon, right? And what I want to do is doing a feature request. So I will accelerate a little bit here, but I'm doing a branch, right? It's my Git flow. I'm doing a branch. I have this pull request coming in. I need to test this new message, right? So I will commit and I will publish the branch and I could create a pull request, right? Here, basic stuff. Again, it's not Humanitec related. You bring your own Git flow, right? But what is interesting here, look at that, one pending check. Actually, something is going on. So while it's going on, let me show you as well what we have, because I was showing you the deploy part in development, but what's happening if I do a pull request, right? So here, I could zoom in a little bit just to make sure everyone is seeing it properly. But here, as soon as I have a pull request, right, what can I do? And here's that the notion of ephemeral environment. What I will do is using, again, the humctl Humanitec CLI. And here I want to create a dynamic environment, a new environment just for this pull request. I need to test my feature branch, right? I want quality here. I want to test the stuff before merging into main and going to the development staging and prod flow. So here, first, in this pull request GitHub action, again, you bring that in your own pipelines, CI/CD pipeline. Here, I'm creating an environment. It's based on the development environment. So if I have other workloads, I could copy all of that and just deploy my workload, my microservice, in order to see how it reacts. It will bring all the dependencies if needed, databases, et cetera, et cetera. And what I will do at the end of the day, a deploy on this specific workload in this new environment, right? Not anymore in development. I'm in a pull request. So I want to deploy this guy with the image just built as well as part of this pull request. And I will deploy that. So what I want to show you here is now I have this pull request. Now here, and look at that, it's already green. So all the pipeline passed. And look at that, I have a comment in my pull request, right? So here I could see in Humanitec, I will show you the portal, what's going on, right? But also I could test my application. So I could click on this and I could see, yes, hello PlatformCon. So here I have a DNS, a URL generated very dynamically for my pull request, and I'm able to test my stuff, right? So that's one of the things you could do here. I could see the diff between two deployments. So here, I'm just keeping my inner loop. If I was in VS Code, in GitHub, and I don't want to go yet in the Humanitec portal, even in Backstage, maybe I could have some insights here, right? If I have an error, I could have the error listed here in my pull request. I could have the resource graph mentioned on a list, the same graph you saw earlier. So here I have some insight, right? Error, successful, and I'm in my Git flow, right? Very important. So that's the concept of ephemeral environment. So let's go back to Backstage. What's going on in Backstage, right? If I open my application, look at this. I created development, the first environment, and then now pull request one, right? And guess what? I have also all the service catalog of my applications, my projects, and I could deep dive about some insight about, is it active? Is it successful in failure? What's the information? What's the value, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a complementary tool, and you choose which one you want to expose, and you could expose multiple, right? So if I go back to this pull request, and I open in Humanitec. So let's see, in Humanitec, the UI, if it's the first time you have seen it, that's what I could see, right? In this application, let me zoom in this environment, so this application have development and have pull request one, I could go and have more information as well, right? So I could look at which cluster my application is running. I don't know as a developer, but if I want the information to collaborate with my platform engineer team, I could look at my workload. I could see the dependencies. Oh, there is a MySQL database. I will show you in the score file how to do that. And here I have someone injecting me a MySQL database, right? So that's good. And I have a container, and this container will have some logs, right? And I have some logs here. Maybe I have some issue. So I could also self-serve on maybe troubleshooting or having some insight. I could see the image built for me and the environment variable I generated, right? Because if I go back to this core file now. You remember during the demo earlier, it was a pod info, an image already built. Here, I'm building my own Node.js application, right? Talking to a MySQL database, right? And how I define that in the core file, right? So I don't know if someone was curious to look at that, but here is another example of a core file, right? Same, I have a name of the workload, I have the service where how I want to expose this container, and then I have one container, right? Image will be built based on the Docker file locally, and look at that environment variable, right? That's where I added the message, and also that's where I could inject the connection string. And here, you remember the Redis test I did earlier. Look at this. I want to expose this guy with a DNS again, but I want a MySQL database. And when someone will resolve this MySQL database, I don't know where it is. Is it in cluster? Is it in AWS, GCP, Azure? Which SKU it is? Which protocol and airbag or security mechanism between my workload and my database is in place? I don't know as a developer. I will let my platform engineer resolve that for me, right? But here, what I know is I need the connection string, right? So here I'm defining a DB type MySQL, and here I'm asking the platform when it will be resolved to inject the name of the database, the username, the password, the host, and the port, right? You could have one environment variable. In my code, that's multiple. And now my code will be able to talk to MySQL, right? So that's kind of an end-to-end flow with this developer inner loop and an ephemeral environment at the first place. We could move on to the next section. Any question here? Anything you want me to clarify on this? So far, so good. So here we just did kind of the two first steps, right? From Backstage, scaffolding, a new repository, a new application in Humanitec, kicking off the first development environment deployment. Then we created a feature branch, feature request with an ephemeral environment via pull request. So that's the kind of things you could do, right? Here, let me check if we have some application here. Yes, that's good. We have 25. I did 4 of them, so 21 is participating, which is good. Wonderful. We should see the same again on an insights perspective. Same components here in Backstage. You could see some people playing around. Yeah, cool. Yeah, and good question. Yeah, so I got a question about what if there were 2 SQL databases, right, with different passwords? And that's actually a good question. Thank you for asking. What you could do here is I want DB1 and I want, let's say, DB2, right? And here you could say, here, I need to talk to 2 databases, right? DB2, 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 DB2. And here, same, right? So you are able to do that. You could say, I need 2 databases, right? And here, so that's how you will do that, right? Kind of. Good question. Another common question around that is, what if I want to share a database, right? So that's what we are going to show and see in a few minutes, how the platform engineering could now wire up and answer such a request, right? But here, as a developer, you could say, hey, I want to reuse a database. I want one database, multiple database. So that's how here you will be able to define that. Good question. Cool. Any other question while I'm here? So far, so good. Wonderful. So after that, and I'm just checking the time. Yeah, we still have some time. So what I want to show you very quickly here is something interesting here. Before jumping into the platform engineering stuff, I want to show you, as a developer, what I can do with the score file, right? Because now what we just did, providing a score file to the orchestrator. And the orchestrator is resolving some dependencies. We have seen the graph and some magical stuff at this stage, and we will show in detail how it is resolved and defined actually. But before jumping into that, I want to show you something in the developer inner loop. Because maybe what you want to do is avoid the fire and forget mechanism and process here, where there is a score file, my app, someone is building the container, and yes, it's deployed over there, but maybe I will have some error. So can I shift left a little bit some quality test? Can I run some smoke test, right? And even if it's not locally, I will show you something locally, how you could actually deploy this core file locally. But maybe you could put that in the CI pipeline and not waiting for the CD pipeline to do that. So what I'm going to show you again is to improve the shift left on the test purposes, where I could actually test my container and my score file. And I see an hand raised. Let me check if there is any question here. Yeah. Do we have anyone? Yeah. I don't know if we, yeah, let's do it. Allow to talk. If you ask, I will do that, even if we are answering, recording this session. Julian, do you want to speak up or write down your question maybe? You raised your hand. Was it for asking something or? Okay, so I will take that for a no. Cool. If you have any question, just put that in the chat. It will be better to answer accordingly. Cool. Wonderful. So here, what I want to show you is going back to this guy here. So again, I'm locally and I want to add more quality, right? So what I want to show you is maybe something, and someone, sorry, noticed that in the repo, in pod info or node service, you scaffold with Backstage. You have this repo, and in this repo, by the way, you have a dev container. So I don't know if you're familiar, that's why I'm in code space. Here I could have a pre-built environment with the VS Code extension. I could have the lint with the specification. I could have Docker here, kind, and other kubectl and Helm tool pre-built. So it's a preloaded environment where you could already do what I'm doing, right? Here, what I want to do is doing and trying to leverage this make file, right? I'm doing the make file just to accelerate a little bit the flow here, but that could be something that the platform engineering is providing to the developer in order, again, to improve the inner loop locally to debug stuff or inject that in CI/CD pipeline, right? So what I want to do is initializing my current Score Compose workspace. Score is a specification. That's the file you saw earlier. And then there is an implementation. One of the implementation to actually deploy a Score file was humctl, Score deploy, to deploy to Humanitec. Another one implementation is Score Compose, right? You don't need Humanitec here. What you could do is here say, hey, please, I want to use Score Compose locally. Wonderful. What you will be able to do here is now say, hey, take this Score file and generate for me the compose file. So I don't need to know Docker Compose. Here, it will generate for me the compose file. If I have Docker Compose installed, Docker installed, etc., etc. So I'm running this command here, and what it's doing is grabbing this core file, right here, where I ask for 2 databases, by the way, live because someone asked here. And also what I can do is see that locally it generated the compose file for me. It generated my service here with the environment variable, and it generated some information about the MySQL database, etc., etc. Right? So I don't know compose file, but here what I can see is I have some resources running, right? And actually deploying. So it's taking a bit of time, so I don't want to spend too much time here. But typically, once it's deployed, I could actually test my application, right? And actually, it's done. So here, maybe what I could do, because I did compose up, what I could do now is test locally. I will invite you to look and read through the makefile to see how to do that. It's not magical, but here, well, I have an error, but the goal is to have this inner loop where I could test my application locally very quickly. Again, I could embed that in my CI/CD pipeline. What I could do as well is using another implementation we have, Score Kubernetes, where I could deploy this exact same score in a Kubernetes cluster and not in Humanitec orchestrator. So very convenient, and I wanted to show you live a demo of that. I hope you could see some scenario and use cases here. We got a question, great question. Score YAML file is translated to Terraform. Also, what mechanisms you use to validate the score? Wonderful. Yeah, good question. Here, how we validate the specification, it's actually via this guy here, right? We have this schema, right, of the score specification. And actually what we do is, if I open this score file, the extension is actually running, and sorry, is actually running a command, which is validate score file, right? Actually, behind the scene, that's another command that I could show you. So you are not mandatory to use VS Code if you don't, this extension, if you don't have VS Code. What you could use is use this guy here and say, I want to score, validate my score file. So that's the tool behind the scene. I'm validating. So I could set up my organization here. And actually, let me switch to this other guy. It will be better. Yeah, stopping now. But yeah, that's the tool used to validate. Now the other question was about, is it translating to Terraform? No, not precisely. So now we will jump into the next section about the platform engineering stuff. But if I could show you very quickly without talking about Humanitec, look at what I mentioned earlier. I mentioned I will, by doing this guy here, right, Score Compose init, I will set up my Score Compose workspace. And where this MySQL implementation came from, right? Because here, if I clear this guy, if I do Docker PS, guess what? I have a MySQL database running locally, right? And how I did that as a developer, is it me? And the answer is no, right? So your question may be related to that, how this MySQL was provisioned here and maybe not in Terraform or somewhere else, right? So let me show you a concept here. With Score Compose and Score Kubernetes, there is this notion of provisioner. So when I did this, again, Score Compose init, I was able to use a default provisioner, right? And if I do that, we provide as an open source tool, Score is open source, by the way. You could look at all the source code of that. We provide by default common used provisioner. if you ask for MongoDB, if you ask for MySQL, if you ask for a DNS, if you ask for RabbitMQ, S3, right? Postgres, Redis. And here, that's where maybe you could take ownership of, is it in Terraform in AWS? Maybe. Here in our case, for this MySQL, if I take this example here, that was a Docker image, right? That's a Docker image here, where I could init my stuff, providing the image, etc., etc. But yes, you're right. You could bring your own provisioner. If you decide, even locally, that it's going to Terraform, you could override this guy here and provide that to your developer. Again, the goal is to abstract for your developer this part. So maybe as platform engineer, you could have a library of provisioner and provide that to them, right? So that's a good question, because now here it was for Score Compose, same for Score Kubernetes. But now what I want to do is bringing this concept in the platform, right? So if I go back to the Humanitec UI here, and yeah, I answered the question. I hope it makes sense. Otherwise, ask for clarification. So what I want to show you now is this part here. What's going on the platform engineering perspective? And we got these provisioners locally. Now in Humanitec, how this magic resolution of graph and dependencies is happening. So here, that's a notion of resource definition. That's a notion of recipes. As platform engineer, by the way, as a developer, you don't have access to this part. That's very for administrator, platform engineer, where you will define the recipes, the resource definition, in order to, again, answer any request coming in from a developer. A developer wants a DNS in dev. Here is how you will do something. They want a Redis in dev, in staging, in prod. That may be different. So here I will take some time here just to show you very quickly, right? Here, everything is a resource. Even the cluster, the runtime will be a resource. You remember in the score file, as a developer, I didn't pick up, select any cluster. This will be resolved by my platform engineering team, because as an organization, we know the context of this project. They will be deployed in this Kubernetes cluster over there in dev, over there in staging, over there in production, and maybe different cluster for different teams and different projects, right? So that's what we call the implicit resources. But you remember as well, they ask for, in the score file, for Redis, for MySQL and DNS. That's the explicit resources asked by developer. How we resolve that? There is three main way to resolve a request for a type, for a resource type, DNS, MySQL, or Redis. So let me grab this example with Redis. Here I have three examples, and you have access to this, so you could look at it. But look at that. I have, for the same resource type, I have three different ways to handle and answer the request of someone want a Redis database, right? Here, there is three main driver. The echo driver will be the ability for you to say, there is an existing database, in this case, Redis database, existing over there, and here is a connection string, right? Very convenient. Here I put some fake value, but here, that's very information statically, already over there. And if someone is asking based on the context, here is your connection string. And here is how you will resolve the associated connection string. So that's the first way to do that. Another one will be template, the driver type template. Again, in this case, anyone asking for Redis, we decide as an enterprise, for example, I will use an in-cluster database. So template is for generating Kubernetes manifest. So in this case, guess what? I have a configuration where I could define manifest, Kubernetes manifest, right? So for example, here, I have a deployment. It could be a stateful set. It could be whatever. You bring your own database. and a way to define how a Redis will be deployed in cluster. So very convenient if you want to minimize cost and control where databases should be. In this case, in cluster. What I want to show you is a third driver type we have for the resources, and that's the Terraform, right? I want to provision in GCP memory store Redis or Azure Redis database in Azure and whatever in AWS, right? So that will be your opportunity as platform engineer to bring your own Terraform module. And what's very convenient here, so let me show you. It's a configuration where you could have inline Terraform script, or you could bring also your Terraform module from a Git source, right? And here you will have your own implementation in Terraform. And you remember when I mentioned earlier that a developer is asking for a database? Yes, you will provision a database. But what about the private service connect or private link between the workload and the cluster and the database? What about the VPC consideration? What about the airbag? What about the workload identity if you want to inject all of this? You will be able to resolve whatever the driver type you are selecting. You will be able, as platform engineer, to inject all of this, right, in the resource graph. Again, it will be standardized and abstracted from the developer perspective because they ask for Redis, but you will be able to define what is the actual resolution of asking for a Redis, right? What is very interesting here is, let's look at one of the database I got earlier, right? So that was this guy. Maybe it was in Pier 1. Let me double check. Yeah, I have this database here, but actually let me take the other one just to show you with Redis to be consistent here. So I already provisioned that earlier. I have a workload, and this workload was, sorry about that. Yes. Application, code info. That was the other application. Wonderful. So I have this application, this workload. And what I did earlier was provisioning a Redis database, right? In the score file, I asked for that, and a Redis database was provisioned. But which one to select, right? How, as platform engineer, I could decide how to answer properly this request, right? And here we could see that this request was answered with the in-cluster Redis resource definition, right? And here what's interesting is, as platform engineer, you will be able to define the fine granular criteria in order to answer the different requests. So for example, you could say everyone will have an in-cluster database, but you could say as well, no, for production, Redis in-cluster doesn't work, right? It's not secure. I will lose data. I may need some persistent volume. I don't want to deal with that. I want Redis in AWS, for example, right? So you could decide here how this resource definition, right? In this case, type Redis, but with a driver type template, so in cluster, I could define when it will be selected. So I could say for any environment, type development, for example, right? But let's say if I go back to the resource definition and I want Redis as Terraform, I could say that this guy will be selected for production, right? It will be more secure. I could also say, I want also for staging. So you could have conditional criteria and rules where you could have a combination of and or rules in order to answer any request coming in, right? Depending on the context, sorry, right? And there is multiple criteria, key criteria you could use here, application, so which project, which environment, which resource, etc., etc. I will pause a little bit here. Any question here? I hope you are following along. Yeah, so far so good. And we have Q&A question. Wonderful. So we can use it to create standalone resources. What if we want to create a complex resource in single template? For example, one load balancer, one VM, and one DB. Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, that's a good opportunity to illustrate that. I kind of illustrated, mention it, but let me show you very quickly. Here, what I could show you is Humanitec docs. So what I want to show you is this library of examples, right? And here we have what we call the resource packs. And here you could have different patterns. And one of them is the one you mentioned, right? So I will go back quickly on the UI, because here, what you could do is for the request coming in, right? So I will grab this guy here. I was on Redis. So let's say you want to provision a Redis database, right? And again, you select a Terraform. Here, you could bring your own Terraform module and having all this complex graph resolved in one Terraform module, right? That's one possibility. But what if you want to reuse the same VPC, the same IAM role, right? Identity, the same airbag mechanism. So you may want to add granular resources, right, with different types. So for example, here, what you could do, if I'm going to configuration, I will have a granular way in my Terraform module. I will be atomic. In my Terraform module, I will just, here in this case, because I'm answering Redis, I will just provision the Redis database, right? But what I will do as well is having the notion of co-provisioning. Here I could say, by the way, if someone is asking for Redis, here is a Redis database, but please co-provision something else. And the use case very commonly used here is the one you mentioned. So for example, I could say edit. And here I could say, please co-provision, in this case, an AWS policy, if I'm in AWS. Or if you are in GCP, it could be bring your Google Cloud service account, right? Or a role, right? So that's how you will be able, GCP IAM policy binding as well. So that's how you will be able to say, hey, for this Redis, I will need to provision another one, right? I could pass some information. Here I could save, but I didn't mention and define the GCP IAM policy binding, right? So what I will need to do after that is actually creating a resource definition. So I will do cancel here, but here the graph will ask for another resource definition. And guess what? You will say, hey, yeah, please, for Google. So if I go back here, I could say for this GCP IAM policy binding, how I want to resolve. Maybe that's yet another Terraform module, just building this role and this Google service account resolution, right? So that's how you will be able to resolve the graph of your resources. I hope that makes sense and answer your question. And we have, back to the resource pack I was showing you at the beginning, that's where you could have, for example, I want workload identity, right? So let's say for GCS, if you're familiar with Google, that's how you will be able to build this kind of infrastructure, this graph, right? So here for a workload, asking for an S3 bucket in Google Cloud GCS, I will have, for example, a policy binding with a Google service account. And maybe I would like read-only mode or write admin role, right? So that's a kind of graph you will be able to resolve. And we have concrete example to show you how this co-provisioning resources is doing, how to propagate context in order to resolve such a complex resource graph on an easy way with our concept here. I hope that makes sense. Let me grab the Q&A. Score, wonderful. And good question, very good question. Thank you for asking. Is crossplane not something that also included in the platform orchestrator as Humanitec is doing, especially when considering the composition of resource into a higher level abstraction of resources? Crossplane had more flexibility because not tied to a specific score YAML spec. Yes, good question. There is similarity, but there is also some complementarity and differences for sure. Yes, you could have this composable composition of resources in crossplane, abstracting that and trying to have this core YAML specification as well. It's still Kubernetes mechanism here. Here with core, you have another layer of abstraction, and you could deploy in Score Compose and Docker Compose or any other target runtime by having an implementation here. That's one of the differentiator. What we propose as well is all this resolution of graph that you could do with crossplane. But we also resolve, for example, external secret reference, right? So we have some advanced feature that you could find with combining other tools out there for sure. But there is some differences. Happy to have a further discussion here, but kind of same concept, but some differences as well. But good question. And by the way, you see the Echo template and Terraform driver type. Template is also a good way to bring your crossplane manifest. So you could have Score, Humanitec, and Humanitec will resolve, for example, for Redis, I want to provision crossplane, right? This crossplane resource. So you could also use crossplane with Humanitec. That's why sometimes it could be complementary. And instead of having Terraform, for example, right? So good question. Another question, when you have a dependent and co-created resource, does it assume the same environment type passed in? If you happen to put a prod resource dependent to a staging resource, would it cause a failure, or would the dependent resource just not be provisioned? That's a very good question. Yeah, there is, let's say, static context that you could pass, actually, that which are passed by default throughout the graph that you cannot change, right? For example, the application, the project, and the environment. All of that will be resolved in one environment, in one resource graph, right? And actually, it will be resolved with another notion, a deployment. So as soon as you resolve a graph, it's based on a deployment. A deployment is in one environment and one application. If I take this example here, I just got a last deployment, and this deployment has its own resource graph for this environment and this Humanitec application, right? So that's a static context. And you could pass, you have seen with co-provisioning, more metadata, for example, a class or other resource identifier that you could pass when resolving, but you cannot change the environment and the application. Now, to your point and question, maybe, that's for sure that you as platform engineer need to properly design how you want to resolve these dependencies with these other dependencies in this context, right? So there is this flexibility, but also responsibility in order to test for sure, and in order to guarantee that you are doing what is promised and supported for your developer. I hope I answered properly the last question, or any question so far. For people who would like to have more details, feel free to re-ask or ask for clarification. My pleasure. And again, that's a very great question. Thank you for that. We don't have any more remaining question here. So what I want to show you as well is the last piece on some, oh, and we have a question. So I think I will take some time here because we have time. Is it possible to promote workload from test to staging to production using Humanitec? That's a really good question, Colby. Thank you for asking. Actually, I should have maybe mentioned that already. So thank you for reminding me. Here, let's say I want this code info application, right? Here, what I did earlier was creating development, a PR, and a staging and a prod. How to do that, right? By the way, parenthesis here, anything I'm doing in the UI, you are able to do that via REST API, via the humctl CLI you have seen earlier, or Terraform provider, right? So here, sometime I'm doing some ClickUps demonstration. It's more visual, but don't make me wrong. What I'm showing you for the deployment of an app, editing an app, it's by score file and the humctl score deploy pipeline, as well for the resource definition, right? So parentheses here, before jumping into promoting by environment. Here, anything here could be done via the UI again, right? But could be done via REST API, humctl CLI, and Terraform provider, which is very convenient to automate everything. Now, let me go back to this guy here. I got this Backstage scaffolding, right? Development, I created a PR from GitHub, and I got PR1, right? How now I promote from the other environment? I could have the humctl score deploy and create environment if it's not existing. Same in my GitHub and CI/CD pipeline. So again, you could do that via CLI or API. But on a UI perspective, how does it look like? I could do the same. You remember create environment based on development for PR1. What was done behind the scene is, and I was maybe too fast, you select one environment and you say, hey, I want to clone you. I want to clone you. To be more precise, I did that by CLI. I said, yeah, I want PR1, right? But in this case, let's say I want staging, right? And it's environment type, staging, right? So there is a granularity with resource environment ID. You could have a type that I'm selecting here. And I could say, yes, please create this environment and BIM, deploy what was cloned. And if I got multiple workloads, it will be copied and deployed, right? So here I'm creating and graduating to a new environment. So you could do that, copy pasting from one environment to another, the deployment, right? What was already deployed. That's what I just did. But in the PR, you remember I did that, this clone, review, deploy, but I also deployed a new version of my workload, right? So you see the capacity here, and I could do that for production, right? And I could say for production, I want to clone staging, right? And not development, etc., etc. I hope that was clear. And I hope it was answering your question. Good question. Another question, is Core Humanitec specific to container images being deployed and thus towards application workloads only? Data project in a data mesh is something completely different and might not have a container to run, but for example, a data pipeline that run in data solutions such as Databricks, Snowflake, etc. That's a really good question. It may need more clarification and part of the answer. But yes, the runtime is Kubernetes. The prerequisite is a containerized workload. But we have been working with customers where they are able, for example, in this scenario of data pipeline, to interact, let's say, via a Kubernetes job. So it's still a workload and ingesting or grabbing the data, and maybe a job pushing some data in other places. So that's something we have seen where even containerized workload running on a Kubernetes cluster could interact with your own data pipeline. But again, it's case by case basis, and I'm not answering generically the question, but we have seen some people doing that. Also for static website, right? At the end of the day, we got some customer not having a website, a front end running on a container, but a job pushing the asset, the static asset, CSS, JavaScript, HTML, in, let's say, Azure Blob Static or any other hosting capabilities here with a Kubernetes job. So there is some capabilities here. But again, I'm not answering generically your question. That's a good question with more discussion for sure to have. I love this. Great question. Thank you for this again. Cool. So we already saw how, as platform engineer, maybe with the help of cloud engineer, security engineer, how I was maybe able to inject some workload identity, some airbag consideration in order to have my workload communicating with a database, right? So that was, no surprise, a resource definition. Let me show you more concrete example of yet another resource definition that you, platform engineers, or with the help of other people, you will collaborate and provide more recipes. So what I want to show you is how I could add more labels and annotations. Maybe I want to track cost optimization, right? In my Kubernetes cluster or in my AWS account. So I may be using tools to control the cost in my Kubernetes cluster, right? So how with Humanitec we could pass such labeled metadata annotation, right? First scenario. Also, if I use some monitoring tool, Prometheus, Dynatrace, other, how I could have Humanitec passing such metadata as well in order to get that in the cluster or in my AWS or GCP or Azure account, right? So here, that will be, again, yet another type of resource that I want to show you. Here, I have a resource definition. The type is namespace. And because we mentioned that, a driver type template. So driver type template, again, Kubernetes manifest, right? And here, I could say that for any namespace that Humanitec will create, because you remember, as a developer, I have this core file. I want to explicit a DNS or Redis or MySQL, but I don't know which namespace, which cluster. So there is this notion of implicit resolution of resource definition. Cluster is one of them. Here, namespace is another one. So here I could say, hey, I want to inject PSS, pod security standard, for any namespace managed by Humanitec. With that, I'm guaranteeing that security is by default for everyone. If I want a label, cost center, I don't know, I could put data here. If I have more labels, annotation, that's how I will be able to inject static value here. I could also grab more dynamic value placeholder based on the context, application, environment. So that's the kind of control and standardization you could do, and centralization of information here. So here I have this namespace, matching criteria for everyone if I want. So anyone will have this label, right? As soon as a new deployment is coming in. So that's one scenario where I could add security and improve my posture, security posture here. Another one I want to show you, another implicit resource, which is a custom workload, right? So again, it will be type workload and driver template, right? In my configuration, if I enable on the namespace PSS, if you're familiar with that, yeah, but how my developer will inject security context to run as non-privileged container or read-only file system? Are they going to tag their score file? The answer is no. That's too much overload. That's a cognitive load that you don't want to shift left to your developer. That's something you want to shift down to the platform. That's where the knowledge and the centralization of information should be, right? And with that, here, you have been deploying, all of you, and I could show you usage here. All of you have been deploying any deployment on a security context, very ardent, like with a strong security context checkpoint and security aspect, running as non-root, second profile runtime default, allow privilege escalation no, false, capabilities drop, read-only file system, non-privilege. So here, since the beginning, you were deploying something. If you try to deploy something trying to hurt my cluster, that's something I was able to block and prevent, right? And here, I didn't ask you to do that in your score file. So that's another advantage of standardization and abstraction, right? I hope that makes sense. Any question? And yes, we have more questions. It feels to me a simple typo in the resource section of score file could lead to a deletion of a storage resource. Should the lifecycle of such resources be decoupled from the app lifecycle in prod environment, or the policies are similar to prevent such accidents? That's a really good question. Yeah, so a typo may lend to a resource deletion. I cannot avoid that or cannot ignore this scenario. That could happen. Like if I do myself, Terraform plan, Terraform apply, and I'm not looking at that and bim, Terraform is doing a destroy and maybe a replace, right? So yes, that could happen for sure. Now there is capabilities to catch this such a thing. And one of a good practice as well is, and it's more Terraform related in this case, but prevent deletion or other flag that you could use with your cloud provider, where you could block any destroy or any deletion for databases. It's a best practice, by the way, anyway. So maybe that could be such capabilities and flag you could use with the different providers out there. And yeah, test could avoid that, and different approach could avoid and prevent such accidents. But at the end of the day, yeah, you're right. Such accident could happen. We are working on a regulated market that requires strict approval before deployment to production. How can the portal help with that? That's a really good question. So you remember I said at the beginning with the reference architecture, you could bring your own CI/CD pipeline. Let's say you still want that. First part of the answer. The second part I will illustrate, but the first part is you have already your CI/CD graduating from dev to staging to prod. Is it on a main, on a merge in a main branch? Are you doing trunk base? Are you doing a Git flow? It depends on your process, right? But what I mean by that is anyway, your pipeline will say, hey, I deploy in development. And here we decided, and we are doing that today, to deploy in staging in these circumstances. And here now in production. At the end of the day, you will ping every time the Humanitec API, right? Oh, in dev, that's now. Oh, and now the trigger for staging. So you will ping Humanitec in this case. So here you could bring your own flow. Is it automatic? Is it manual approval? You could keep this, right? Because it's robust. It's what you want to keep. And you just interact with API at the right time. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer, if you don't have such existing workflow with manual approval and things like this in GitHub Action, in Azure DevOps, in Jenkins, all of them have such manual approval, right? If you don't have them, you could leverage what I mentioned earlier, the notion of Humanitec pipeline. So it could be complementary to your existing tool versus you could add manual approval as well in Humanitec if you want to add more guardrail, right? So here, I don't know if you noticed, and I didn't illustrate so far, but look at that. I'm on a specific deployment, on a specific environment, right? And I have this notion of pipeline, right? And in pipeline, by default, you didn't edit or created this guy. By default, we have what we call a default pipeline. And if you're familiar with Jenkins, GitHub Action, Azure DevOps, and GitLab, that's the same principle here. We have a kind of a YAML file with steps and jobs, right? So you could have here more intelligence in Humanitec in order to add some custom action, right? By default, we just do these 2 steps to deploy to Humanitec and in a specific environment and project as soon as someone is asking to deploy, right? But what you could do, and I will switch to the documentation here. Here we have what we call pipeline. So here you might take pipeline, and here you could bring other actions. And here is a list of the action, right? To your point, I could have here Humanitec approve, right? So here I could add a manual approval, and that's how you will be able to do that, to add in Humanitec another guardrail to ask for manual approval. You could interact with your GitLab pipeline if you want to have a callback over there or having some manual approval over there as well. GitHub workflow as well. You could interact with HTTP external request, Slack, and other tools that you want. So yes, that's a good question. Long answer, but I hope it makes sense. And yes, that's possible with or without your existing tool. Let me grab the other question. By the way, we cover kind of the workshop. I hope people are still continuing testing, but please keep the question coming. If I'm not mistaken, we still have 20 minutes. It feels, yeah, the typo, we are working on regulated market. How Humanitec works with monorepo? Are you able to provision applications inside a monorepo? That's a good question, right? So here, what I want to show you is a way to deploy. So when you say monorepo, it may depend what you want to do. But here, what you may want to do is deploying at once multiple microservices, multiple workloads. So it depends on what you mean by monorepo, and is your deployment pipeline monorepo as well, like mono pipeline. So I will try to illustrate that. But you remember, you're able to say humctl score deploy on a specific granular workload, one container, right? But what you could do as well, and here I have an example of 11 microservices. I could deploy each of them if they are in multiple repo. But here in this example, by the way, it's public, you could have here, yes, for sure, a score file per microservice, right? Like here, let me zoom in maybe a little bit. But what you could have as well is say, hey, anyway, I always want to deploy everyone at the same time, mono pipeline, right? Mono deployment pipeline. And here, that's something you could do as well. You could say here is my list of all the workloads I want to deploy at once, please, right? Instead of each granular one. So couple of options here. It depends of if you have a mono repo, but multiple pipeline or one pipeline, it depends. But yeah, pick your option, pick your best practice you are already doing, and we cover that. I hope that makes sense. Is there any state management involved in the orchestration, and how is it managed along with Terraform state? Good question. Yes. For internal state, we have such capabilities in the resource definition. I won't go too much in detail, but there is a cache mechanism, or what we call cookie, in each resource definition, right? And by the way, You could bring your own secret manager, right, with Humanitec, where such cookie will be stored in your secret manager. So that's, for example, for some scenario of some resource definition, something you could bring. For Terraform specifically, you will bring your own Terraform state, right? Because you don't want us to manage that. We have a way to manage that. But at the end of the day, you want to bring your own S3 bucket, Azure Blob Storage, or whatever in your own networking and subscription with security. And you don't want us to have access to this, right? So when I showed you earlier how you could bring your Terraform module, actually you could bring and define the Terraform state, because that's a backend section in your Terraform definition, right? So yeah, good question. That's how you will bring that, and you will manage and have control on your Terraform state. Cool. I hope I answer all the questions. Again, if you need clarification, feel free to keep coming with this question. And yes, that's pretty much it for this part. That's kind of a wrap. I may have some other demo if someone is asking. I'm still here until the end. I could show you more stuff. But yeah, what I want to wrap up, if I could take 5 more minutes here of your time. And again, please keep the question coming. What we have seen is, on the developer perspective with this core file, how the velocity, the productivity is enhanced, improved, right? We have seen, on the other hand, how platform engineering could standardize and abstract recipes and resource definition to answer any request of deployment coming in from a developer standpoint. And in the middle, we saw also the Humanitec portal that the developer could have access and see just with their own airbag access. I didn't show that, but we have fine-grained role-based access control, where a developer will be able to just see their own project, their own workload, maybe in just view only, read only, and not deployer, because maybe you want a service account interacting with Humanitec and not people interacting with Humanitec. So you have such granularity. On the other hand, the administrator, platform engineer, who has access to more administrative stuff in Humanitec. What we have seen also is a complementary tool with Backstage, with a Humanitec plugin in order to interact with the Humanitec API and grabbing some data, deployment status, resource graph, and stuff like this. But what we always recall and remind is tools, technologies. We could talk about that every day, all day long, right? Should we use Argo CD versus Flux CD? Should we use Kyverno versus OPA, Gatekeeper, et cetera, name it, right? And at the end of the day, yeah, you could select and pick your own tools, right? If it's working, that's working. But for the successful IDP we could see out there, so successful internal developer platform, you should focus more and more on what we call the product mindset, which is, what are we going to resolve? What are we resolving for the developer, for our customer? Do we have a roadmap? Do we have a capabilities list? What do we support today? What are we going to support tomorrow, in the future? What we are not going to support, right? Such interaction with your now customer, internal customer, right? And that's very key here, because the great question we had today was about, hey, what about this? How I could guarantee that, how I could avoid that. And yes, you're right. No magic, right? And that's where you could sit down and say, hey, we just support this use case. We understand another use cases could come, but we don't have evidence yet. And for now, we just document that in the backlog, right? And maybe we could reorder the priority and stuff like this. So that's very key here, to know your customer better and aligning and adjusting your capabilities of your platform. So please don't underestimate this product. We have, based on experiences with customer, we have developed such a program, MVP program, where we could accelerate some minimum viable platform with what you have seen today. And Mallory, my colleague, just did a talk yesterday, I think, in PlatformCon. So that's the link. And she's deep diving a little bit more about the lessons learned with what we have seen. So if you want some tips, insights to do your own, to start with your platform and building your own IDP, I highly encourage you to see the great insight she's sharing with you. Other demonstration, my colleague Ben and Suza did the talk yesterday as well about Score, with Score Compose and Score Kubernetes that I very quickly touched, but they are going more in detail with that. And I have another demo with Score, Dapper, and Humanitec. It will be in 2 days if you want to look at that. I want to grab more questions if possible. And again, if someone is asking me live demo, I could maybe show some live stuff as well. And I got a question, so let me grab this. How you can update an infrastructure template and get versions of the resources. Let's say bucket S3 v1 and bucket S3 v2. How the orchestrator handle those changes? That's a really good question. And there is multiple use cases and scenario for this. So let me switch here in the UI. And you're right, because let me show you something. Let's say it was S3 bucket in your example, but let's say I'm grabbing this Terraform Redis, right? And at the end of the day, here I'm pointing to maybe Terraform module doing Redis, but same for S3 bucket or any database, right? And that's actually a good scenario with an orchestrator, because here you could say, I abstracted my developer. It's a choice we made as a community, as an organization, that we will abstract the version of S3, the version of PostgreSQL, version of Redis, Mongo, name it, right? And we want to abstract that. But we want also to keep control about the migration, right? Because not supported version, or in your case, which scenario you want, S3, V1, V2, whatever, right? So here, what you could do here is today, right? You could have another resource definition, right? That could be one option. One option could be, hey, I have this new version and close to the other Terraform module, but I want to keep control. Maybe here, again, it's a platform as a product mindset. You may want to do canary deployment of this. You may want to test the rollout strategy. You may have a rollout strategy around, is it now for everyone, or is it just 5%, 10%, 20%? And you could gradually have this rollout strategy. And here, no magic. It will be based on the matching criteria, how you want to play with that, right? So you will be able to update the matching criteria of the true resource definition. And that's the strategy you could have, right? Another scenario is we are coming soon. It's on our public roadmap, so no secret here. We are coming with a versioning of one resource definition, right? So instead of having these two resource definition, you will be able to have an history and versioning of one resource definition. And that could be another alternative to what I just said, more centralized. And again, you could have a complementarity in the two options and the two scenarios I mentioned. But yeah, that's a good scenario here. What I may want also to bring into your attention is another aspect here I didn't mention. Here, and actually it was in the resource pack I mentioned earlier. You remember this read-only versus admin, right? So there is this concept of, I want to access S3 bucket. Is it just in read-only or just in admin? Here you could have provided by the developer or abstracted by the platform engineer, but you could play with another matching criteria, very interesting, for such capabilities of, is it read-only versus write or admin? And in your case, can I have in my organization, in my platform, a support? Because it depends on time. How long do you want to manage two versions of S3 bucket or two versions of MongoDB, right? So here you have a strategy, right? And it's well documented, well supported. Another scenario to support that could be also to provide information here, right? So in your score file, you will be able to say, hey, I want read-only, right? Class read-only. I want class write access, right? And I don't know, maybe you will be, you would like to provide S3, for example, current, class current, and maybe you are working on S3 V2, but let's say you could say next version. So here you are not asking your developer to pass technical detail implementation, but you are abstracting and making your product, the features of your product. And here you could have, hey, if someone would like to use the next version, please provide the information, kind of, right? So that's kind of capabilities you could play with. And I could show you in the score file how to path that, but that's the idea as well. Thank you for the question. Is the Humanitec portal meant only for platform engineering persona only, or it is supposed to be available to the developer persona as well? If the latter, is their view presented to each persona different for the different areas or responsibility? Yes, good question. You're right. I don't have a developer persona to show you, but you see the UI behind me here. You see all of this. All of this is because I'm administrator, right? If you are a developer, you just see application, just this. You don't see anything else. And here you could see also not all the application, your application you are assigned to, right? So there is kind of 3 levels of airbag. So let me go quickly here to answer your question, maybe on a long fashion. And actually I won't go there. But here at the organization level, you are either admin or member, like developer. But here what you could have as well, at the application level, you could say, hey, I want to add people. And by the way, those people are owner, viewer, or developer, right? So you have this kind of granularity in order to restrict who has access to what, right? So yeah, great question. And yes, developer don't see the same stuff as the platform admin. What if a team needs to customize a template to meet some business criteria? That's a good question. And which template are you referring to? There is a Kubernetes template for the resource definition. That could be the template in Backstage. That could be the template in any resource definition. My generic answer, so please clarify live. Otherwise, into the chat. Yeah, just write the template into the chat. Okay. Resource definition. Yes. So there is a resource definition is kind of static in terms of what we support. We have a driver type where you could have more dynamic fields. Is it echo? Is it template? So Kubernetes. And is it Terraform, for example? And we have other driver type as well. There is a way, and most of them are kind of generic, right? So we need to sit down with your need, and if you see a blocker, maybe we have already something to support it for your use case. But also, you could bring your resource type, and driver type could be something as well. You could bring where you want to have more extensibility, if I could say. But yeah, we prefer to sit down with you and make sure we could show you some options before having your custom types. Good question as well. Thank you. Yeah. Is there any other question? I think we are 5 minutes before the end of the session. And I already answered this core YAML file translated in Terraform, which mechanism to use to validate. I showed you live humctl core validate. And for the Terraform, actually, I showed you that in the resource definition, that's something you could translate in Terraform. Also, I showed you in Score Compose or Score Kubernetes without Humanitec, how you could bring your own provisioners. If you're interested, just say it in the chat and I could share a blog article to show you how to bring your own Score Compose or Score Kubernetes provisioner. Cool. I think that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoy the content, the flow, the pace. Any feedback, please? We would like your feedback, your question. So please keep them coming. Yeah, hope to see you around. I'm still here for the couple of remaining minutes until the webinar, the workshop is ended. But yeah, any other question? While doing that, I'm also trying to see in our Backstage instance how many components. Yeah, 27. I got 4, so it's 23 people who created a repository and associated Humanitec application. So that's good. And we could see development, no pull request. And yeah, maybe that's because you were not right. You didn't have right access in the different repository. Apologize for that. That was kind of on purpose, but maybe I could pass on the different repo and approve some pull request, but no pull request here. But yeah, cool. Any other topic for the remaining 1 minute? Cool. I thanks everyone for your time and the active session. Yeah, and talk to you later. I will stop sharing my screen. And stop the recording.